Welcome back to The Tipping Point, the channel where we dissect the critical moments, the split-second decisions, and the unconventional actions that change the course of battles, and sometimes the course of war itself. Military doctrine is forged in fire, honed over generations, written in the blood of countless soldiers. It provides structure, discipline, a common language under the unbearable stress of combat. Follow the plan, trust the chain of command, execute the mission as ordered. These are the bedrock principles. But war is a fundamentally human endeavor, chaotic, unpredictable, and infinitely complex. And sometimes the plan is wrong. Sometimes the orders are too slow. Sometimes the only path to victory or even survival lies in defying the very structure designed to ensure it. Tonight, we delve into one such moment, a story whispered in hushed tones in operations centers and passed down through generations of soldiers. It comes from the dust and heat of the early days in Afghanistan, a time when rigid, conventional thinking often clashed violently with the asymmetric, unpredictable nature of the enemy. It's the story of a convoy, a critical enemy supply line snaking through a treacherous mountain pass. It's the story of a plan, the standard operating procedure, deemed too slow, too risky by the book. And it's the story of a rookie, a private first class, fresh out of basic, barely understanding the complexities of the battlefield, who saw a different way, a faster way, a brutally effective, terrifyingly risky, completely unapproved way. They told him he was crazy. They told him to stand down. They told him he'd get everyone killed. But in 4 minutes, his stupid idea didn't just work. It annihilated the enemy and saved his unit. This is how one rookie's unapproved plan crushed an enemy convoy in 4 minutes. Before we get boots on the ground for this incredible story, if you believe that courage sometimes means challenging the status quo and that the stories of ingenuity under fire deserve to be told, then I need you to secure our digital perimeter. First, hit that subscribe button and make sure you activate all notifications by ringing the bell. It's crucial support for the channel. Second, give this video a like. It tells the algorithm that this content matters. And finally, drop a comment down below. Let us know what country and city you're watching from. Seeing our global community rally around these stories is truly inspiring. Now, let's get to the overlook. The Afghan sun was a malevolent white-hot eye in the vast, bleached blue sky, beating down relentlessly on the barren, rock-strewn ridgeline. Below, observation post Viper clung precariously to the mountainside, a small, sandbagged pimple on the face of the Hindu Kush. It was less a base, more a temporary inconvenience carved out of hostile territory, manned by a weary platoon from the 10th Mountain Division. Their mission: watch. Specifically, watch Route Jackal, a treacherous, winding dirt track that snaked through the valley below, the primary artery used by Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters to move men and materiel between safe havens. For 3 weeks, Viper Platoon had endured the heat, the dust, the freezing nights, and the gnawing tension, their eyes glued to spotting scopes, their radios crackling with routine sit-reps. Nothing. Just the occasional goat herder, the shimmering heat haze, and the oppressive, waiting silence of the mountains. Until now. Contact! The voice crackled over the platoon net, sharp, urgent, cutting through the monotonous afternoon hum. It was Sergeant First Class Marcus Flint, the platoon sergeant, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Contact, convoy, southbound on Jackal. Estimate, 20 vehicles. Repeat, 20 vehicles. Mix of technicals, SUVs, couple of jingle trucks bringing up the rear. Moving fast. Grid. He rattled off the coordinates, his words precise, practiced. In the cramped, stifling confines of the sandbagged TOC bunker, Lieutenant Michael Chen, the platoon leader, leaned closer to the Sintgar's radio, his heart giving a sudden heavy thump. 20 vehicles. That wasn't a resupply run. That was a major movement. Maybe reinforcements heading south. Maybe leadership relocating. Maybe something worse. Viper actual, copy contact, Chen replied, his voice calm, betraying none of the sudden adrenaline surging through his veins. He was young, barely 2 years out of West Point, but smart, cautious and keenly aware of the weight of command in this unforgiving place. Viper 2-5, get eyes on. Confirm count and composition. Viper 3-0, prepare fire mission, target grid reference. He continued issuing orders, his mind already racing through the standard operating procedure. A convoy of this size, moving this fast, presented both a threat and an opportunity. Standard doctrine was clear. Observe, report, call for air support, or, if feasible, engage with indirect fire, mortars or artillery, to disrupt or destroy. Direct engagement by a small, isolated platoon against such a large force was suicidal. Viper 2-5 confirms, came the voice of Corporal Davies from the forward LPOP, his breathing slightly ragged. Definitely 20+. Lead elements are technicals, heavily armed, 50 cals, maybe DSHKs. Rear, looks like troop carriers, maybe ammo. They're kicking up a hell of a dust cloud, sir, moving aggressive. Aggressive. Chen didn't like the sound of that. Aggressive meant they weren't trying to sneak. They were moving with purpose, maybe even expecting trouble, or confident they wouldn't find any. He looked at the map overlay on his battered Panasonic Toughbook. Route Jackal ran directly below OP Viper, maybe 800 meters down the steep, rocky slope. But the key terrain feature was the choke point, a narrow defile 2 kilometers further south, where the valley walls closed in, forcing the road into a tight, winding bottleneck barely wide enough for 2 vehicles abreast. It was the perfect ambush site. It was the place he would hit them, if he had the assets. Fire direction, Chen said into his handset, switching to the mortar section's frequency. Target reference 3 Alpha 9er. That's the choke point. Prepare mission. Variable time fuse, proximity burst. I want maximum suppression when they hit that bottleneck. Time of flight estimate? 2 mics, 30 seconds from fire for effect, sir, replied Sergeant Henderson, the mortar section leader. 2.5 minutes. Chen glanced at the real-time plot on his screen, Davies updating the convoy's position. They were moving fast, maybe 40-50 kilometers per hour on the relatively straight stretch before the choke point. He did the math. They'd be in the choke point in less than 3 minutes. They'd be through it in maybe 4. His mortar rounds, even if perfectly timed, would land just as the tail end of the convoy was clearing the kill zone. It was too slow. Air support? He asked the TOSI operator, Corporal Evans. Evans was already shaking his head, his hand over his headset. Negative, sir. Nearest KS is 20 mics out, tied up supporting Bulldog Company further west. Spectre gunship is off station refueling. No joy. 20 minutes. By then the convoy would be long gone, vanished into the labyrinthine valleys to the south. This was it. A major enemy movement happening right under his nose, and his only effective weapon, his mortars, were half a minute too slow. Frustration gnawed at him. He could see them. He could almost touch them. But the book said, disrupt, delay, report. Don't engage directly. Don't risk the platoon. It was the smart play. It was the safe play. It was also, he knew with a sickening certainty, letting the enemy get away clean. All right, he sighed, making the decision. Henderson, stand by on the fire mission. Davies, keep tracking. Evans, report contact up to Battalion TOS. Request updated air priority. We'll track them. Hit them with mortars as best we can, and pass the BDA. He was following procedure. He was doing his job. He hated it. Sir? A hesitant voice. Chen turned. Standing in the doorway of the bunker, silhouetted against the blinding sunlight, was Private First Class Liam Kelly. Kelly was the definition of rookie. Barely 19, fresh out of infantry school and airborne training, assigned to Viper platoon just 2 weeks ago as a replacement for a wounded saw gunner. He was eager, almost painfully so, constantly asking questions, volunteering for every patrol, every guard shift, trying desperately to prove himself to the combat-hardened veterans who mostly ignored him or treated him with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He was currently assigned to the mundane task of perimeter security, walking the wire. He wasn't even supposed to be in the talk. What is it, Kelly? Chen asked, his voice sharper than he intended. He didn't have time for rookie questions right now. Sir, Kelly stepped inside, blinking in the dim light. He was holding his M249 saw, and his eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a kind of intense, almost manic energy. He pointed vaguely down the valley, towards the choke point. "Sir, the mortars? They're too slow. We'll miss 'em." Chen gritted his teeth. "I'm aware of the timing issues, Private. We're doing what we can. Now get back to your post." "But sir," Kelly persisted, stepping further in, ignoring the glare from Sergeant Flint, who had just entered the bunker. "There's another way, a faster way." Flint took a step towards Kelly, his hand instinctively going to the private's shoulder, ready to physically escort him out. "Private, you heard the lieutenant. Out." "No, wait," Chen said, holding up a hand, a flicker of curiosity overriding his annoyance. Kelly, despite his FNG status, wasn't stupid. He was quiet, observant. "What way, Kelly?" Kelly took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Sir, the Claymores. We got 24 M18A1s stockpiled, right? For perimeter defense?" Chen nodded slowly. "Claymore mines. Anti-personnel mines. Designed to spray a fan of steel ball bearings. Devastating against infantry in the open. Useless against vehicles." "Okay. And we got," Kelly continued, his voice gaining speed, "that old Wolfhound system, the crew jammer we're not supposed to use anymore because it fries our own comms?" The Wolfhound, a powerful, vehicle-mounted radio jammer designed to defeat remote-controlled IEDs. It pumped out a massive amount of broad-spectrum RF energy. And yes, it tended to deafen their own radios in the process. It was sitting, unused, mounted on one of their parked Humvees. "Yeah?" Chen prompted, a growing sense of unease mixing with his curiosity. Where was this going? "And we got," Kelly swallowed hard, his eyes bright, "about 500 meters of standard commo wire, WD1, sitting in the supply tent, and blasting caps from the demo kit." Sergeant Flint stepped forward again, his face thunderous. "Private Kelly, what in the ever-loving hell are you talking about? Claymores? Jammers? Blasting caps? This is a convoy, not a goddamn science fair. You want to maybe build him a strongly worded letter while you're at it?" "No, Sarnt," Kelly insisted, turning to face Flint, refusing to back down. "Think about it. The choke point. It's narrow, steep walls on both sides. What if we don't shoot at them? What if we bury them?" Chen stared at him. Flint stared at him. The TOC operator stared at him. "Bury them." "Sir," Kelly said, turning back to Chen, his voice dropping, intense, urgent. "Those cliffs above the choke point, they're mostly scree, loose rock. I saw it on patrol yesterday, barely holding on. What if we daisy-chain the Claymores? Not facing out, like normal, but facing in. Towards the cliff face. Rig 'em with timed blasting caps, maybe 10, 15 mines, wired together. And instead of using a standard clacker, what if we rig the initiation circuit to the Wolfhound?" Chen's brain struggled to keep up. Wire Claymores into the cliff. Initiate them with a radio jammer. "Kelly," Chen said slowly, that's insane. First, Claymores are anti-personnel. They won't trigger a rock slide. Second, initiating blasting caps with a radio signal that's incredibly dangerous and unreliable. And third, the Wolfhound? It just blasts static. It doesn't send a signal. "Not a coded signal, sir," Kelly agreed eagerly, "but it puts out a massive RF spike. Enough juice to just maybe, induce a current in a long enough wire loop, like an antenna. If we rig the blasting caps just right, maybe use some sensitive E-matches, maybe that spike could kick 'em off, all at once." He was breathing hard now, the idea pouring out of him. "And the Claymores, maybe one won't do much, but 15 M18s detonating simultaneously, firing 700 steel balls each directly into that loose rock face at point-blank range. Sir, it wouldn't be a rock slide. It'd be an avalanche. It would come down like the fist of God. It would bury that choke point, bury the whole damn convoy." The talk was dead silent again. Chen stared at Kelly, then at the map, then back at Kelly. Flint looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. It was the single most unorthodox, most dangerous, most jury-rigged, most unapproved plan Chen had ever heard in his life. It relied on unproven physics, unstable demolitions, and banned equipment. It had 100 ways to fail, catastrophically, and it was brilliant. It was audacious, and it was fast. If it worked, it wouldn't just disrupt the convoy, it would annihilate it in seconds. "Sir," Flint finally choked out, his voice strangled. "Permission to escort the private to the med tent?" "I think the heat's gotten to him." Chen ignored Flint. He looked at Kelly, really looked at him for the first time. Not as a rookie, not as a liability, but as a soldier who had just offered him a potential miracle. "Kelly," Chen said, his voice quiet. "How long? How long to rig it?" Kelly didn't hesitate. 2 guys, 15 mines, 500 meters of wire. 10 minutes, sir, maybe 12. Chen looked at the screen. The convoy was less than 2 minutes from the choke point. "Can you do it in 4? Kelly's eyes widened. 4 minutes? To sprint down the backside of the ridge, carrying explosives, wire, and tools, rig a complex, unproven demolition charge on a cliff face, and get back to cover before the convoy arrived? It was impossible. "Yes, sir," Kelly said without a flicker of doubt. Chen made the decision. Screw the book, screw the mortars, screw air support. He looked at Flint. "Sergeant, you heard him. Grab Corporal Peters, grab the demo kit, grab every claymore we have, grab the commo wire. You have exactly 4 minutes to get that charge set. Overlooking the choke point. Wire it facing in. Use the E-matches. Leave the initiation leads exposed. Go, go." Flint stared, dumbfounded, then his eyes hardened. He nodded once. "Peters, on me! Move!" The 2 NCOs exploded out of the TOC. Chen turned to Kelly. You stay here. Talk me through this wolfhound trigger." Kelly looked crestfallen for a second, then nodded, understanding. His job wasn't to be the hero, it was to be the brain. Chen grabbed his own radio handset. "Henderson?" He barked into the mortar net. "Abort mission. Abort fire mission. Stand by for alternative tasking." He switched frequencies. "Davies, Viper 2-5, keep eyes on. Give me a countdown. Time to choke point?" "Sir?" Davies's voice crackled back, filled with confusion but obeying instantly. "Lead elements. Estimate. 90 seconds to choke point." 90 seconds. Flint and Peters were already halfway down the trail, disappearing into the heat haze, their arms full of deadly green plastic crescents. Kelly was frantically sketching a wiring diagram on the back of a map board, showing how to rig the blasting caps to the Wolfhound's antenna feed. It was insane. It was beautiful. And it was happening. The next 90 seconds stretched into an eternity, each tick of the second hand on Chen's watch echoing like a hammer blow in the suffocating tension of the TOC bunker. Outside, the Afghan sun beat down, indifferent. Down the valley, the unseen enemy convoy roared closer, a river of dust and steel flowing inexorably towards the choke point, towards the unseen. Unproven trap being frantically assembled by Flint and Peters. Inside the bunker, Private Kelly worked like a man possessed, his initial nervousness replaced by a surgeon's focus. He ripped open the access panel on the Wolfhound's control unit, a heavy gray metal box bolted to the radio rack, exposing a rat's nest of coaxial cables and circuit boards. His hands, surprisingly steady now, moved with a speed and precision that belied his rookie status, stripping wires, crimping connectors, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Okay, Lieutenant," he explained, his voice tight but clear over the radio static. "This is the main RF output line, the one that normally feeds the broadcast antenna." He held up a thick black cable. "Sergeant Flint needs to run the initiation wires. Both leads, twisted together to act as a single conductor, right up to the base of the Wolfhound's antenna mount on the Humvee. He leaves the ends bare. When I give the word, I'll disconnect this feed," he pointed to the cable, "and physically jam the bare wires from the blasting caps directly into this output port. Then, I hit the transmit button." Chen stared at the crude schematic Kelly was drawing. It was insane. It bypassed every safety interlock, every fuse, every surge protector built into the multi-million-dollar jamming system. It was essentially turning the Wolfhound into a giant, uncontrolled capacitor discharge unit, dumping a massive, raw RF pulse directly into a set of highly sensitive electronic blasting caps. "Kelly," Chen said, his voice barely a whisper, "are you sure this will work, inducing a current like that?" "Not sure, sir," Kelly admitted, not looking up from his work. 90% chance it just melts the wires, 9% chance it does nothing. But maybe that 1% chance, that initial voltage spike before the safeties kick in or the wires fuse, maybe it's enough to kick off the E-matches. It's gotta be simultaneous, sir. All 15 caps have to go at the exact same microsecond for the shockwave to hit the cliff face right. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting Chen's, and for the first time, Chen saw the sheer, terrifying intelligence behind the kid's eagerness. "It's physics, sir, or maybe just wishful thinking, but it's faster than the mortars." Faster than the mortars. That was the brutal, simple truth. Chen nodded grimly. "All right, Kelly. Make it ready." He keyed his handset again. "Viper 2-5, status, time to choke point." "Lead elements, entering the choke point now, sir." Davy's voice was tight with adrenaline. 15 seconds until the main body is fully inside." 15 seconds. Chen glanced at the commo wire spool leaning against the bunker wall. Flint and Peters had taken the entire 500 meters. Had they made it? Were they clear? Had they wired it right? There was no way to know. Radio silence was absolute, partly due to procedure, mostly due to the fact that the Wolfhound, even inert, tended to mess with their low-power comms. "Kelly," Chen said, his voice cold, "prepare to initiate." "Standing by, sir," Kelly replied, his hand hovering over the Wolfhound's main power switch, the other hand holding the bare, stripped end of the initiation wire pair that snaked out of the bunker towards the hidden Humvee. Chen switched back to Davies. 2-5, talk to me. Convoy status. Main body entering now. Technicals, SUVs, jingle trucks starting to bunch up in the narrow section. Dust is thick. They're almost halfway through. Tail end just entering the bottleneck. "Okay," Chen breathed. He pictured it. 20 enemy vehicles, packed bumper to bumper in a narrow, inescapable defile. Cliffs rising steeply on both sides. Flint and Peters had to be clear by now. They had to be. 2-5, Chen ordered. Confirm when the last vehicle is fully inside the choke point boundaries. Roger, watching the tail. Watching. Last truck is in. Last vehicle is in the kill zone, sir. The whole damn parade is bottled up. This was it, the moment of truth. If Kelly's theory worked, it would be a massacre. If it failed, if the mines didn't go, or only partially detonated, or triggered a pathetic little puff of dust, then Chen had just revealed their position, wasted their only chance at disruption, and alerted a very large, very angry enemy force sitting right on their doorstep. His career would be over. His platoon might be next. He looked at Kelly. The kid's face was pale, beaded with sweat despite the bunker's relative cool, but his hand was rock steady. "Kelly," Chen said, his voice barely audible. "Hit it." Kelly didn't hesitate. He flipped the main power switch on the Wolfhound. The lights in the TOC bunker flickered violently as the jammer sucked juice from the generator. A deep, powerful electronic hum filled the air, a sound you felt in your fillings. Then, with his other hand, he took the bare wires leading to the unseen claymores and jammed them, with a shower of blue sparks, directly into the high-voltage RF output port of the jammer. "Fire in the hole!" Kelly screamed, not into a radio, but just raw, primal instinct, and slammed his fist down on the Wolfhound's transmit button. For one agonizing, silent second, nothing happened. Chen's heart stopped. It failed. Oh God, it failed. He saw Sergeant Flint's face in his mind, furious, betrayed. He saw the convoy rolling out of the choke point, unscathed. He saw the court-martial. And then, the world ended. It wasn't a sound that reached them first. It was a feeling. A deep, subterranean thump a concussion wave that traveled through the rock of the mountain itself, hitting the floor of the TOC bunker like a physical blow, rattling the ammo cans on the shelves, knocking the radio handset off its cradle. A split second later, the sound arrived, not as a sharp crack, but as a vast, low-frequency roar. A sound like the mountain itself was groaning in agony, like 1,000 freight trains derailing simultaneously. It was a sound that went on and on, a deep, grinding avalanche of noise that completely overwhelmed the senses. Chen scrambled to the bunker's narrow observation slit, shoving the stunned TOC operator aside. He stared down the valley towards the choke point, 2 kilometers away. He couldn't see the convoy. He couldn't see the road. The entire choke point, the entire narrow defile was gone. It had been replaced by a vast, roiling, boiling cloud of brown dust and black smoke, a cloud that climbed hundreds, maybe thousands of feet into the clear blue sky. It looked apocalyptic. It looked like a volcano had just erupted. As he watched, mesmerized, the dust cloud slowly began to settle, revealing the impossible. The cliff face on the eastern side of the choke point, the one Kelly had targeted, had simply ceased to exist. It had collapsed inwards, 1,000,000 tons of rock, scree, and earth sliding down in an unstoppable wave. The narrow road where the convoy had been just seconds before was buried. Not damaged, buried. Under 50, maybe 100 feet of rubble. It wasn't a crater, it was a tomb. Kelly's stupid plan, his unapproved theory, his 1 in a million gamble with RF energy and jury-rigged demolitions, had worked. It had worked with a finality, a terrifying landscape-altering efficiency that was beyond anything Chen could have possibly imagined. He had wanted to disrupt the convoy. Kelly had erased it. The radio, which had been momentarily deafened by the wolfhound's blast, just as predicted, sputtered back to life. It was Davies, from the LPOP, his voice choked with awe and disbelief. Viper. Actual. Viper actual. Jesus. Mary. And Joseph. Did you see that? The whole goddamn mountain just fell down. There's nothing left. The convoy it's gone. It's just gone. Chen keyed his mic, his hand shaking. Viper 2-5, copy that. Report BDA. Bomb damage assessment. It was the standard, procedural next step. It was also the most ridiculously inadequate phrase Chen could imagine for the geological event he had just witnessed. BDA? Davies laughed, a high-pitched, slightly hysterical sound. Sir, the BDA is total, absolute. There are no vehicles visible. There is no road visible. There's just mountain. Recommend we reclassify the choke point as impassable, permanently. Chen looked over at Kelly. The private first class was slumped back against the radio rack, his face chalk white, his body trembling violently. The adrenaline had dumped, leaving behind the stark, shaking realization of what he had just done. He had just buried perhaps 100 enemy fighters under 1,000,000 tons of rock, using nothing but spare parts, demolitions, and a rejected theory about radio waves. He looked terrified. As well he should be. Sergeant Flint's voice crackled over the net, ragged but alive. Viper actual, this is Viper 3-0, charge, functioned as advertised, sir. Peters and I are clear. Returning to OP. Chen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They were safe. The charge had worked. The convoy was destroyed. He looked at Kelly again, then keyed the mic. Solid copy, 3-0. Good work. He paused, then made another decision, another step off the well-trodden path of procedure. Viper actual, out. He put the handset down. He looked at the TOC operator. Get battalion on the horn. Report convoy destroyed by, unconventional means. No further details. He then walked over to Kelly. The kid flinched as Chen approached. Chen put a hand on his shoulder. Kelly looked up, his eyes wide, expecting the reprimand, the court-martial, the end of his short career. Kelly, Chen said, his voice quiet, serious. You disobeyed orders. You utilized unauthorized equipment. You initiated an unapproved, highly dangerous demolition procedure based on, what was it? Wishful thinking. Kelly just stared, speechless. Chen's face broke into a slow, tired, utterly relieved grin. That was the single most brilliant, most insane, most effective damn piece of soldiering I have ever seen. You just saved this platoon. You just won the goddamn war for today. He squeezed Kelly's shoulder. Now, go get some water. You look like you're gonna pass out. And, maybe disconnect that wire before the wolfhound decides to cook off another mountain. Kelly just nodded, a dazed, uncomprehending look on his face. He had done it. The rookie. His stupid plan. 4 minutes. Total annihilation. The way special forces operated. Looking for unconventional solutions. Leveraging technology in unexpected ways. It had just been demonstrated. Not by a seasoned operator, but by a 19-year-old PFC with a crazy idea and the courage to voice it. The silence that descended upon the TOC bunker after Davy's breathless report was profound, broken only by the high-pitched whine of stressed electronics from the abused wolfhound unit and the sudden, frantic thump, thump, thump of Chen's own heart against his ribs. Outside, the echoes of the mountain's roar faded, replaced by an eerie quiet, the kind of stillness that follows an earthquake, leaving behind only the distant crackle of what must have been secondary rockfalls and the thin, high ringing in their ears. Chen stared out the observation slit. The dust cloud, a monstrous churning behemoth of brown and gray, still dominated the valley, obscuring the choke point entirely. It was settling, yes, but agonizingly slowly, a shroud drawn over an act of geological violence. Total. Absolute. Davy's words hung in the air. Chen looked over at Private Kelly. The kid was leaning heavily against the concrete wall, his face the color of bleached bone, his eyes wide and unfocused, staring at the floor. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, the wiring diagram he'd sketched moments before fluttering loosely in his grip. He looked like he was going to vomit, or faint, or both. The adrenaline dump had hit him hard, the sheer terrifying scale of what his wishful thinking had just unleashed crashing down on him. He hadn't just triggered an explosion. He had moved a mountain. He had, in the space of 4 frantic minutes, become an instrument of annihilation on a scale few soldiers ever witness, let alone initiate. The weight of it seemed to be physically crushing him. Chen knew he needed to regain control, to impose order on the chaos, both inside the bunker and outside. He keyed his handset, his own voice sounding distant, detached. Viper Actual to Battalion TOC, over. The reply was instantaneous, laced with static and anxiety. Battalion Actual, send your traffic, Viper. Battalion Actual, be advised. Chen chose his words carefully, acutely aware of Sergeant Flint now entering the bunker behind him, covered head to toe in fine gray dust, his face grim. Enemy convoy previously reported has been effectively interdicted at grid reference 3 Alpha 9er, Route Jackal choke point. Heavy ordnance employed via available platoon assets. Route Jackal is confirmed blocked. Repeat, route is blocked. Enemy losses assessed as total. No friendly casualties at this time. Request immediate ISR assets for BDA and route assessment. How copy? Over. Available platoon assets. It was vague. It was bureaucratic. It bought him time. Time to figure out how the hell he was going to explain this. The battalion operator sounded bewildered. Solid copy, Viper. Convoy interdicted. Route blocked. Losses total. Using platoon assets? There was a pause, the unspoken question hanging heavy. What assets? Your mortars couldn't do that. Confirm ISR request is priority, Chen pressed, ignoring the implied question. Need eyes on that choke point ASAP. Viper Actual, out. He put the handset down, his hands slick with sweat. He turned to face Flint. The platoon sergeant looked exhausted, his ears probably ringing even worse than Chen's, but he was wired, alert. Corporal Peters stumbled in behind him, looking equally ragged but giving Chen a shaky thumbs up. Charge set, Lieutenant, Flint reported, his voice raspy, his eyes flicking briefly towards Kelly, then back to Chen. No hint of I told you so about the mortars being too slow. No hint of awe about the result. Just the facts. Functioned, as discussed. Peters and I are clear. Took cover behind the North Ridge spur. Sounded like the end of the world. He paused, pulling a canteen from his pouch and taking a long swallow. Reckon nothing's getting through that choke point again. Ever. Good work, Sergeant, Chen said simply. The relief of seeing them back alive was immense. His gamble hadn't cost him his men. He looked at Kelly again. The kid hadn't moved, still trembling. Kelly, Chen said, his voice softer now. Sit, Rep. Kelly flinched, startled. He looked up, his eyes slowly focusing. Sir. Deep breaths, Private, Chen said calmly. It's done. You did good. Now talk me through the Wolfhound. Any damage? Can we shut it down safely? Kelly nodded, swallowing hard, pushing himself off the wall. He stumbled over to the humming gray box, his training kicking back in, a lifeline of procedure in the overwhelming shock. Yes, sir. RF output is likely fried. It took the direct short from the det cord leads, but the main power seems stable. Initiating shutdown sequence. Now. He flipped a series of switches, his hands still shaking but finding the right sequence. The deep electronic hum died, replaced by the normal, frantic chatter of the talk. The lights, which had dimmed during the power surge, returned to their normal, harsh brightness. The immediate crisis was over, but the questions were just beginning. Chen knew the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Masters, would be on the radio soon, demanding answers. How had a single infantry platoon, armed primarily with rifles and machine guns, managed to obliterate a 20-vehicle convoy and permanently block a strategic route with available assets? What kind of ordnance could cause that level of devastation? The vague report wouldn't hold for long. Davy's voice crackled over the net again. Viper actual, 2-5. Dust is settling, sir. I don't even know how to describe this. The eastern cliff face, it's just gone. Slid straight down. The road is buried under, 50 feet of rock? Minimum. There's nothing. No movement. No vehicles visible. Not even wreckage. It's like the convoy just vanished into the mountain. He paused, his voice dropping. We saw maybe 2 or 3 guys, right at the tail end. They got thrown clear when the slide started. Looks like they're trying to climb out back the way they came. Should we engage? Chen considered it. Survivors, witnesses, but they were fleeing, disorganized, no longer a threat, and engaging them now would just draw attention, create more questions. Negative 2-5, Chen ordered. Maintain observation only. Let them go. I want this area cold until ISR arrives. Understood. Roger, sir, watching them limp away. Chen turned back to Flint and Kelly. All right, we need to sanitize, now. He pointed at the Wolfhound. Kelly, get that initiation wiring out of there. Make it look like it was never touched. Flint, those Claymore crates. Make sure they're accounted for, but maybe the inventory count was off by 15. Paperwork gets lost in the field, right? Flint met Chen's gaze, a flicker of understanding, maybe even grudging respect in his eyes. He knew what Chen was doing, burying the evidence, protecting his men, protecting the rookie who had just pulled their asses out of the fire with an act of inspired lunacy. It was unconventional. It was probably illegal. It was also leadership. Inventory's always off, Lieutenant, Flint grunted, already turning to Peters. Heat of battle. Things get misplaced. Peters, let's go find those missing mines. They disappeared back out of the bunker. Chen looked at Kelly, who was frantically but carefully removing the scorched wires from the Wolfhound unit, wiping away the carbon scoring around the output port. The kid was smart. He understood the need for discretion. Kelly, Chen said quietly, that schematic you drew, where is it? Kelly looked up, startled, then pointed to the map board where it was still tacked. Burn it, Chen ordered. Now, and this conversation about RF initiation, induced currents, it never happened. Officially, Sergeant Flint used a standard command detonation, timed sequence, maybe some det cord relays. Got it. The Wolfhound was never involved. Kelly just nodded, his eyes wide. tearing the schematic off the board and reaching for a Zippo lighter one of the operators kept handy. The smoke curled up, erasing the physical proof of his stupid idea. But the result? The result was carved into the mountainside 2 kilometers away, an undeniable monument to unconventional thinking. The comms console buzzed, the secure satellite phone, direct line to Battalion HQ. Chen took a deep breath. Showtime. He picked up the handset. Viper Actual, send it. Viper, this is Battalion 6. The voice of Lieutenant Colonel Masters, cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of amusement. Report, now. What the hell just happened out there, Lieutenant? My JOC looks like Krakatoa just erupted on your sector map. What ordnance did you employ? Was it an airstrike I wasn't told about? Chen chose his words with extreme care, Kelly pausing his work, listening intently. Negative, sir. No airstrike. We identified a significant enemy convoy transiting the choke point. Given the time constraints and lack of available air or artillery support, we elected to interdict using pre-positioned demolition charges placed on the cliff face overlooking the route, standard M18A1 claymores, configured for maximum fragmentation effect against the rock formation. There was a long silence on the other end. Chen could almost hear Masters processing the absurdity. Claymores, against a convoy, triggering a rock slide. Claymores, Lieutenant, Masters finally asked, his voice dangerously soft. You're telling me you stopped a 20-vehicle convoy and blocked a strategic route with anti-personnel mines? Yes, sir, Chen said, keeping his voice flat. Sergeant First Class Flint executed the demolition plan. The geological conditions were unexpectedly favorable. The resulting rock slide significantly exceeded initial estimates. Route is completely impassable. Convoy is assessed as neutralized. Another silence. Masters was no fool. He knew this smelled wrong. Claymores weren't designed for this, but the result, the undeniable, map-altering result, was staring him in the face from his own intel feeds. Exceeded estimates, Masters repeated slowly. Indeed. All right, Lieutenant. Maintain observation. Secure your position. I'm sending the QRF helo your way with my S3 and an engineer detachment to assess the geological conditions. Expect them wheels down in 30 mics. And, Lieutenant, sir, when they get there, Masters' voice was pure ice. You had better have a damn convincing explanation for how Sergeant Flint managed to trigger 15 claymores simultaneously from 2 kilometers away, using standard command detonation. The line clicked dead. Chen put the handset down, his hand trembling slightly. 30 minutes. He had 30 minutes to come up with a plausible lie that wouldn't get himself, Flint, and especially Kelly, thrown into Leavenworth. He looked at Kelly, who had finished cleaning the wolfhound and was now nervously trying to re-spool the commo wire. The kid looked up, meeting Chen's eyes, a silent question in his gaze. Chen just shook his head slightly. The unapproved plan had worked. Now came the hard part, surviving the victory. 30 minutes. Chen looked at the cheap plastic clock ticking on the bunker wall, each second stretching into an agonizing eternity. 30 minutes to weave a story, a lie plausible enough to satisfy a skeptical S3 major and a team of combat engineers who were about to witness firsthand the raw, geological surgery his platoon had just performed. 30 minutes to protect his men, especially Kelly, from the potentially career-ending, court-martial level consequences of their brilliant, desperate, utterly illegal success. The weight of command settled on him, heavier than the mountain rock that now entombed the enemy convoy. He wasn't just responsible for their lives in combat anymore. He was responsible for their lives after combat, in the equally dangerous terrain of military bureaucracy and investigation. He looked at Kelly, who was now meticulously, almost obsessively, coiling the salvaged commo wire, his face still pale, his eyes darting nervously towards the bunker entrance. The kid was a hero, a potential genius, but he was also 19, a PFC, and utterly unprepared for the bureaucratic meat grinder he had just thrown himself into. He wouldn't survive a formal inquiry. Chen had to protect him. He looked at Sergeant Flint, who was field stripping his M4 with a calm, deliberate focus, his movements economical, his face unreadable. Flint knew the score. He'd backed his lieutenant's insane gamble, executed the mission flawlessly, and now he was trusting Chen to handle the fallout. That trust was a heavy burden. "All right," Chen said, his voice regaining its command authority, cutting through the tense silence. "Listen up. Here's what happened." He spoke quickly, decisively, weaving the lie as he went. "Sergeant Flint, you and Peters prepositioned 15 M18A1 claymores along the eastern cliff face overlooking the choke point, targeting identified areas of unstable rock as part of a contingency plan for route denial. Correct?" Flint met his gaze, nodding slowly. "Standard procedure for establishing a defensive perimeter in volatile terrain, Lieutenant. Contingency planning." His voice was flat, practiced. "Good," Chen continued. "Upon visual confirmation of the significant enemy convoy entering the designated kill zone and lacking timely air or artillery support, I authorized Sergeant Flint to initiate the pre-planned demolition sequence using standard M57 clacker, firing devices, and cord relays." He paused, looking directly at Kelly. Due to the unexpectedly favorable geological conditions and the simultaneous initiation achieved through Sergeant Flint's expert rigging, he deliberately avoided mentioning how that simultaneity was achieved. The resulting rock slide significantly exceeded predictive models, resulting in the complete blockage of Route Jackal and the neutralization of all enemy elements within the choke point. "Understood?" Kelly just nodded, swallowing hard. Flint spoke up. "Sounds exactly like what happened, sir. Expert rigging, favorable conditions, exceeded expectations." Peters, standing silently beside Flint, just grunted in agreement. It was thin. God, it was thin. Claymores triggering a mountain collapse. Simultaneous detonation with clackers and det cord across 500 meters of cliff face. Any competent engineer would smell bullshit from a mile away. But it was plausible. Just barely. It fit the physical evidence they would find. Claymore fragments mixed in the rubble, maybe. Expended blasting caps, spools of commo wire. It didn't explain the how. Not really, but it offered a what that avoided mentioning the wolfhound, the RF pulse, Kelly's insane theory. It was a story built on half-truths and convenient omissions, the standard currency of military explanations. "Okay," Chen said. "Kelly, you had nothing to do with the demolition. You were manning perimeter security. Then you reported to the TOC for comms watch after the contact report. You heard the explosion like everyone else. Got it?" Kelly nodded again, relief briefly washing over his pale face. He was being protected. "Flint, Peters, you're heroes. You executed a difficult, dangerous demo under pressure, saved the platoon, stopped a major enemy movement. Stick to the story. Standard procedure. Favorable conditions. Big boom." Flint allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Yes, sir. Big boom." The radio crackled again. "Viper Actual. This is Griffin 6, the QRF helo. We are 5 mics out. LZ is, looking pretty dusty down there. Pop smoke on your location." "Roger, Griffin 6. Smoke deployed," Chen replied, nodding to the talk operator who relayed the instruction. 5 minutes. Chen took another deep breath, trying to calm the frantic hummingbird in his chest. He looked at his men. Kelly, the terrified architect of their victory. Flint and Peters, the unflappable triggermen. Davies, somewhere out in the LPOP, their eyes on the battlefield. Henderson and the mortar crew standing by, probably wondering what the hell had just happened. Evans, the radio operator, his face a mask of nervous professionalism. They had faced the enemy and won. Now they had to face their own side. The roar of a Black Hawk helicopter grew louder, closer, echoing off the surrounding peaks. It swept overhead, kicking up a blinding cloud of dust as it settled onto the small, makeshift LZ just outside the perimeter wire. The ramp dropped, and 3 figures emerged. Silhouetted against the rotor wash, Chen recognized Major Thompson, the Battalion S3, a sharp, no-nonsense operations officer known for his attention to detail. Beside him was Captain Davis, the battalion engineer officer, already frowning as he surveyed the dust-choked valley. And behind them, Lieutenant Colonel Masters himself. The battalion commander hadn't waited for the report. He'd come himself. This just got serious. Chen met them at the edge of the LZ, snapping a salute as Masters approached, his face unreadable behind his sunglasses. "Report, Lieutenant," Masters said, his voice calm but with an underlying edge of steel. Chen repeated the concocted story, trying to keep his voice steady, focusing on the facts as presented. Convoy sighted, lack of assets. Pre-planned demo. Flint and Peters execution. Unexpectedly large rock slide. Convoy destroyed. Route blocked. Masters listened patiently, his eyes scanning the ridgeline, the dust cloud still hanging heavy over the choke point 2 kilometers away. Major Thompson scribbled notes on a pad. Captain Davis, the engineer, kept shaking his head slightly, a look of profound skepticism on his face. When Chen finished, Masters was silent for a moment. "Claymores," he finally said, the word hanging in the air. 15 of them. Triggered a landslide that buried 20 vehicles. "Yes, sir," Chen said, meeting his gaze. The rock face was apparently highly unstable. "Apparently," Masters echoed, his tone dry. He turned to Captain Davis. "Captain, your assessment?" Davis stepped forward, pulling out a pair of high-powered binoculars. He scanned the distant cliff face, or what was left of it. "Sir," he said slowly, "from this distance, it's impossible to be certain. But the scale, the sheer volume of displaced rock, 15 claymores, even perfectly placed and simultaneously detonated, which is technically challenging with standard M57s and det cord relays over that distance. It seems disproportionate, sir. M18s are designed for fragmentation, not brute force blasting. To achieve this level of geological displacement would typically require significantly larger specialized charges, C4, cratering charges, placed within boreholes, not just surface-mounted." He lowered the binoculars, his skepticism clear. "Frankly, sir, based on standard blasting calculations, 15 claymores shouldn't have done this." Chen's blood ran cold. The engineer wasn't buying it. Masters turned back to Chen, his eyes narrowed behind the sunglasses. "Lieutenant, any specialized charges employed? Anything not on your standard platoon equipment list?" This was the moment. The direct question, lie or confess? Chen thought of Kelly, trembling back in the talk. He thought of Flint and Peters, covered in dust, risking their lives on his order. "No, sir," Chen said, his voice firm, unwavering. "Only standard issue M18A1 claymores and associated initiation systems, employed as per field manual doctrine for route denial, adjusted for local terrain." He held Masters' gaze. It was a bald-faced lie delivered with the conviction of a man protecting his men. Masters stared at him for a long, hard second. Chen didn't flinch. Finally, Masters nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Very well, Lieutenant. Major Thompson, get aerial photos. Captain Davis, take your team down there, assess the stability, see if the route is salvageable. Though I suspect Sergeant Davies' assessment of permanently impassable is likely accurate." He looked back at Chen. "Good initiative, Lieutenant. Stopping that convoy was critical. Your innovative use of available assets, while dramatic, achieved the desired effect." He paused, letting the unspoken warning hang in the air. "Don't ever pull a stunt like this again. Secure your OP. Expect to be relieved within 48 hours. Well done." He turned and walked back towards the waiting Black Hawk, Thompson and Davis scrambling to follow. Chen watched them go, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had done it. He had stared down the battalion commander and held the line. The lie had held. For now. He turned and saw Sergeant Flint standing nearby, watching him, a small, almost invisible nod passing between them. They were safe. Kelly was safe. He keyed his handset. "Kelly," he said quietly. "It's okay. We're clear." The shaky voice that came back was filled with pure, unadulterated relief. "Roger that, sir. Lieutenant?" "Yeah, Kelly. That Wolfhound antenna feed cable." Kelly's voice was hesitant. "It's, completely melted, sir. Looks like the system really didn't like that." Chen just chuckled, the tension finally breaking, exhaustion washing over him. "Add it to the list, Kelly," he said. "Add it to the damn list." The unapproved plan had worked. The secret was safe. But Chen knew, looking at the impossible dust cloud still hanging over the valley, that something fundamental had changed. The rulebook hadn't won today, ingenuity had, and a rookie PFC with a crazy idea and a roll of commo wire had just shown them all a terrifying, brilliant glimpse of the future of warfare. The thumping roar of the Black Hawk faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier, more profound than before. Chen watched the helicopter bank away, a black dragonfly against the stark blue sky, carrying Lieutenant Colonel Masters, his skepticism, and Chen's fragile, hastily constructed lie back to the rear. The immediate danger, the threat of instant discovery and retribution, had passed. But the weight of what they had done, what Kelly had done, settled onto OP Viper like the fine, gray dust still drifting down from the sky. Chen turned back towards the talk bunker, the adrenaline finally ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the acrid taste of fear and cordite in his mouth. Sergeant Flint was already there, overseeing the frantic cleanup, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor in the chaos. He caught Chen's eye and gave another almost imperceptible nod. The story holds. For now. Inside, Kelly was slumped in a chair, mechanically field stripping the melted, useless antenna feed cable from the Wolfhound unit. His movements jerky, his eyes still holding a haunted, distant look. He looked impossibly young, a boy who had just been forced to wield the power of a god, and was now grappling with the terrible, messy consequences. The sheer, dumb luck involved, the precise geology of the cliff, the unpredictable physics of RF-induced detonation, the enemy convoy arriving at the exact moment the charge was ready, was staggering. But it wasn't just luck. It was Kelly's mind, his ability to see connections others missed, his refusal to accept the limitations of the approved solution. He had seen the problem not as a communication officer would, range, frequency, encryption, nor as a demolition expert would, charge weight, placement, initiation train, but as a system, an interconnected system of rock, radio waves, and explosives. And he had hacked it. "All right, Kelly," Chen said, pulling up another chair, his own legs suddenly feeling unsteady. "Reports filed, such as it is. Flint and Peters are backing the story. For now, we're okay." Kelly looked up, but the haunted look didn't leave his eyes. "Sir, those men, in the convoy. You did your job, Private." Chen cut him off, his voice firm but not unkind. "You identified a threat. You proposed a solution. It was approved, a necessary lie even now reinforcing the official narrative. And it was executed. It was effective. End of story." But it wasn't the end of the story, and they both knew it. The questions would linger. The engineers would study the site, scratch their heads, write reports filled with caveats and uncertainties about the unexpectedly friable rock strata. Major Davids, back at brigade, would nurse his grudge, waiting for an opportunity. And Kelly. Kelly would carry the weight of those 4 minutes, the weight of that impossible avalanche, for the rest of his life. Chen knew he had to protect the kid, not just from the bureaucracy, but from himself. "Listen to me, Kelly," he said, leaning closer. "What you did today, it wasn't in any manual. It wasn't taught at any school. It was creative. It was thinking outside the box. In this kind of fight," Chen gestured vaguely towards the valley, towards the invisible, asymmetric enemy. "That's what keeps us alive. Not just following the checklist, but understanding the tools, the environment, the possibilities. You saw a possibility nobody else did. Don't ever lose that." He wasn't just reassuring the kid, he was reminding himself. The rookie, the FNG, had just taught him, the West Point graduate, a profound lesson about the changing face of warfare. It wasn't always about bigger guns or faster jets. Sometimes it was about the clever hack, the unexpected exploit, the asymmetric advantage gained by using your enemy's assumptions, or even just the terrain itself, against them. Sergeant Flint came back into the bunker, ducking his head. He tossed a scorched, twisted piece of metal onto the map table. It looked like part of a truck's chassis, catapulted nearly 2 kilometers by the blast. "Found this up by the LZ," he grunted, Reckon BDA is confirmed. He looked at Kelly, then at Chen. ISR drone is overhead now. Battalion sounds, confused but happy. Routes blocked, convoys gone, mission accomplished. He allowed himself another small, grim smile. Just gotta write the damn AAR now. Gonna be a work of fiction. Make it a good one, Sergeant, Chen said. He stood up, stretching his aching muscles. The adrenaline was completely gone now, leaving only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He walked back to the observation slit and looked out at the valley. The dust had settled further. The scar on the mountainside was stark, brutal, a raw wound ripped into the ancient landscape. Route Jackal no longer existed at the choke point. It simply ended, buried under a new, man-made cliff face. It was ugly. It was permanent. It was victory, achieved not through overwhelming firepower, but through a moment of desperate, unorthodox brilliance. The official report, Chen knew, would sanitize the event. It would mention pre-positioned charges and favorable conditions. Kelly's name, his insane RF trigger theory, the Wolfhound jammer, none of that would appear. It was too irregular, too unexplainable within the rigid framework of military reporting. But the story, the legend, would persist. The tale of how Viper platoon, cut off and outnumbered, had somehow called down the thunder of the mountain itself to obliterate an enemy convoy. It would become one of those whispered, semi-mythical accounts of battlefield ingenuity passed down from soldier to soldier, the details blurring over time, but the core truth remaining. Sometimes the rules have to be broken. Sometimes the rookie sees the shot no one else does. Sometimes the stupid plan is the only plan that works. Chen looked back at Kelly, who was now helping the TOC operator repatch the comms lines, his hands still shaking slightly, but his focus returning. He wasn't just a liability anymore. He wasn't just the kid who needed protecting. He was a weapon, a different kind of weapon, one that didn't fire bullets but ideas. And Chen knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that in the long, grinding, asymmetric wars to come, soldiers like Kelly, the ones who could see the connections, who could hack the system, who weren't afraid to try the unapproved plan, they would be the ones who made the difference. They would be the ones who wrote the next chapter of warfare. His job was to make sure they weren't crushed by the system before they had the chance.